We've selected 4 videos that our subscribers have sent in for critique. I'm a powerlifting coach. I've been one for 10 years now, and we're gonna give some free coaching to our subscribers, so check it out. Before we get started, however, this video is sponsored by Bells of Steel. More on that a little later. Let's get to Izzy's deadlift. Dylan, tell me about Izzy's deadlift.
Izzy has been training for 2-ish years and has switched to doing powerlifting specific training in the last 2 months and would like to compete one day. With her deadlift, she feels like each rep moves really slow, even when the RPE is pretty low and the lift feels relatively easy. Let's see here. This video was about RPE 7. She is tall-ish, 5'9". So maybe that has something to do with it, but also she thinks she's having trouble generating power and explosiveness in the movement and would appreciate any advice you have with that. She struggles a bit with the first rep of each set feeling harder than the subsequent reps and is curious why that might be.
Okay, a couple things here. So number 1, let's look at your start position on rep 1, right? We've got hips about there. Sorry, my drawing is not perfect. Knees there, shoulders there, right? First rep. You said you struggle with the first rep. Now let's look where we pull our second rep from. We're a little further back. Knees are a little further back. Second rep move a little better? It does move a little bit better. So the big difference is in the first rep, you're going a little more towards the bar as you set up, right? You're leaving that bar slightly in front of you and you're moving your body towards it. Therefore, you're moving your center of mass and center of gravity forwards and towards the bar. On the second rep, you're doing a better job of pulling the bar to you, probably pivoting a little more slightly onto your heels. And that way you're kind of shifting everything back. There's more of you behind the bar. So that's the first change. When we're struggling with that first rep, I think that's something that is worth looking at. Is the positioning actually different from first to second rep? Now the next thing we're seeing here is this tendency for the shoulders to be a little bit shrugged up. Generally speaking, the shoulders being shrugged up because that's the anchor point for the bar is going to increase our range of motion. If the anchor point for the bar was down here and our shoulders were depressed or anti-shrugged, then we got the same length anchor, but the bar is, an inch lower. So make sure to try to make those arms long, pull those shoulder blades down your back, right? The anti-shrug. If you're sitting there, shrug up, then move your shoulder blades the opposite way and then keep going, boom. That's where you want your shoulder blades to be when you deadlift. We don't need them up, and we don't even necessarily need them back. I think that's another trap a lot of people fall into, is pulling the shoulder blades back. We want long arms. The next thing is, I want you to do away with this idea of explosive deadlifts. I think that's a myth. I think that's, again, kind of a trap people fall into. They want to move everything really, really fast. And in the deadlift, I think maybe more than any of the other lifts, the old adage that slow is smooth and smooth is fast prevails. So if we can be controlled and consistent off the floor, try to maintain our positioning, push through the initial sort of stickiness of getting that bar moving, then by the time we get to the knees, we're in a really good position to have a really clean and consistent and powerful lockout. So don't worry about trying to be explosive off the floor. Worry about trying to pull yourself into a good position and start smoothly. The other thing we're seeing on a lot of these reps is as you pull in, we're knocking the bar away. See how that bar has to roll out and around you? So that bar rolling as you pull in, not the biggest deal, but if that bar's rolling as you pull in and you're starting the pull as soon as you pull in, then we're starting the pull with the bar moving actively away from us. That's gonna make it way harder off the floor, right? There's gonna be a lot more work to do to create this inertia in this plane here so that bar doesn't keep rolling away from you. Whereas if you pull in, you wait a second to make sure that bar is still and then pull, we're gonna have a lot more sort of straight up and down line of pull on the bar. Right, see how we're kind of knocking the bar away as you pull in? Just take a second after you pull in, make sure your tension's there, make sure the bar is still, then pull. All right, couple different things to look at and to work on there, Izzy. I hope that helps. Who's next, Dill?
Next up, we have Chris.
All right, Chris.
Chris says, greetings from the Netherlands. Chris squats high bar and asks to grass because he likes the aesthetics. He competes in street lifting, so weighted pull-ups and dips. His deadlifts are progressing great, but his squat has always been a big weak point. He struggles with the following. Number 1, feels stable with both knees and foot pressure, as you can see on the 3rd rep. Number 2, I have a good neutral brace with tight upper back, but as soon as I descend, my lower back goes into too much extension / anterior pelvic tilt. What kind of cues can help me stay neutral? And number 3, struggling with wrist pain the last few months, probably because I flex, not extend my wrist pretty forcefully for upper back bracing. I never feel tight with an extended wrist.
Okay. So, I mean, you kind of pointed out this break in the bracing as you descend, right? So, couple things here. Number 1, if we're not feeling any tension in the upper back until we flex the wrists, that might be a good place to start, right? We got to think about shoulder position, because right now it looks like our shoulders are up and forwards so that we can get that sort of flex position, where what we want is we want to actually work on trying to create upper back tension before we even unrack. So I don't see the unrack, I don't see the walkout here, but I do see us, when we clamp those ribs down, there's a lot of this in the shoulder blade, right? The shoulder blade is sitting forwards and it's sitting elevated. That makes it really hard to get upper back tension. We're essentially pulling those shoulder blades out of all that tightness in the mid upper back. What we want to do is when we take our grip on the bar to squat, we want to try to pull our shoulder blades together, even just slightly, and we certainly want to try to pull our shoulder blades down. That, by doing so, we're going to be pulling the elbows down in towards the sides. Again, we're kind of up here, and we're creating upper back tension and tightness, I think mostly in the upper traps, probably where we're going to be feeling that tightness. Now that tightness, unfortunately, does not tie into the brace very well at all. So we can see on these last few reps, towards the end of the set, we do start to see that bar pull us forward. That's going to be compounded by the fact that we're in that really extended brace, but you can see, especially as you come out of the bottom on this rep, right? Look at how much that bar rolls forward and changes your upper back position. So even with your flexed wrist position, we're not really creating much upper back tension, right? So we're creating something that feels like tension, and maybe it is tension, but I don't think it's happening in the right places, right? It needs to be more in your mid back. It needs to be more in your lats. It needs to be more in sort of in between and below the shoulder blades to create that upper back tightness and stability. The next thing that we need to work on is learning the hinge, right? So it looks like on some of these reps, we do a decent job for the first tiny little bit, right? But the first action is still, we're going into extension right from the start, right from the get-go. Part of it is likely that we're maybe watching ourselves in a mirror or something. Take these hooks, move them over here, look out, and that way you're not looking at yourself while you squat. A lot of lifters look at themselves while they squat. They try to use the visual feedback as a sort of cue so that they can, change their technique or be cognizant of things as they're lifting. Let's ditch that visual feedback. We want to be able to feel the feedback. We want visceral feedback, as it were, as a thing. The biggest thing is just learning to hinge, right? So once we tie in the upper back, we've got a good brace here. This is totally disconnected. So, if we can tighten and find upper back tension, learn how to incorporate that into our brace, that is the start. The next thing is learning how to hinge, right? Hinging is not going to start with arching. It's not going to start with driving your chest up, right? We have to learn how to, instead of doing this, to go from here through various degrees of hip flexion without changing the position of the back. One of the best ways to do this, and we've talked about this before on Form Check Friday, take a broomstick, hold it one hand under, one hand over, hold it on 3 points of contact, your low back, kind of right at the top of your butt crack, your upper back, right at your shoulder blades, and your head. Now, if it comes off your mid back, then you're overarching, right? You're going into extension because your low back and your lumbar is popping out behind you and pushing it off of your back. So you're gonna hold that there, and then you're gonna learn to actually hinge and push back, push the weight onto your heels, push back into your hips, and find that tension. Because right now, yeah, you're right. We are just going into that sort of anterior pelvic tilt, and that combined with the fact that our upper back bracing is not really tying the bar into the rest of our body. I understand you like high bar for the aesthetics of it. I think maybe experimenting with some lower bar stuff might help teach you to find better upper back tension, how to hinge, how to brace. And I'm not saying you have to walk away from or not push your high bar squat, or even that you have to do low bar squats as your sort of main movement. But what I would recommend is trying some low bar squats as an accessory movement to help teach you some of the fundamentals of squatting that are going to then carry over into your high bar squat. So I hope that helps, man. Next,
we have Adam.
Okay.
This is a bench press. Adam has been competing for about 5 years and has done around 10 meets. Bench is his weakest lift, with only about 10 kilo improvement over the last 5 years.
Okay.
His recent feedback from his friends is that he's benching with his arms and not raising his chest to the bar. He keeps his hands rather narrow. When he widens for extended periods of time, he gets pec strains that set him back.
Okay.
Is it time to widen it up? And are there any setup issues?
All right, so a couple things here. Number one, definitely do some wide grip work. Definitely try that out. Definitely see how that goes. One thing I'm noticing here is that because we bench pretty close grip, we're tucking pretty hard, right? As soon as you press, those elbows come back out into position. That works fine for close grip. If we're then going to a wide grip bench and trying to really tuck, that might be one of the reasons we're starting to feel some jankiness in the shoulder. When we're using a wider grip, we're gonna need to do a little more elbow flaring. Might even need to kind of ease your way into a wider grip, switch to a wider grip for an accessory movement, and maybe start with a board press or a spoto press. You know, ease into that longer range of motion. You're also gonna need to adjust the intensity, right? You're not gonna be able to be like, okay, I'm gonna do wide grip bench. We're just gonna use the same loads, the same estimated top end, same percentages, same RPEs that we would normally use for this close grip bench that we're super well adapted to. You can't just sort of one-to-one those things. You have to treat the wide grip as its own movement. I don't necessarily think that you're doing anything wrong with not bringing your chest up to the bar enough. I do think that when you unrack here, we are really losing the shoulder position that we're creating in the setup. So we're setting up and then we're unracking and letting the shoulders follow and pop forward. We also see more of that shoulders forward as we get the lock out of this rep. As we come towards the top end, again, the chest is flattening out more. The back is flattening out more because the shoulders are moving. So we really have to work on keeping that shoulder position more consistent, both on the unrack and on lockouts, because I'm guessing you have one of those benches, and my bench was like this for years, where it's really fast until it isn't. And the thing that kind of gives that away is that loss of shoulder position, right? Because you'll go from an RP7 rep to all of a sudden it's a 9.5 because we lost a bunch of shoulder position between reps. We went for another one and we're way out of position. So, you know, holding the position is probably gonna be the biggest thing in terms of the technique. And the other thing I'd look at is if the bench isn't moving or has moved, you know, only 10 pounds or 10 kilos in 5 years, it's probably time to look at some programming. It's probably time to look at, you know, figuring out why it's not going. Because even with suboptimal technique, you know, a person should still probably be able to make gains on their lifts based on good programming and adapting to that work. On that note, you can check out the Calgary Barbell Training app. And also I notice that Adam here is benching on a Bells of Steel bench. Now, Bells of Steel happens to be a sponsor of Form Check Friday. Imagine that. Bells of Steel is a Calgary owned and operated company run by strength athletes for strength athletes. They've got a lot of great ways in which they've taken the strength training equipment world and made it accessible for people who want a garage gym or a home gym, or, as you see around me, a small studio gym. So the footprint of a lot of their equipment is smaller. The cost is greatly reduced from what you would pay from one of the bigger commercial vendors of equipment. And their stuff's really well thought out. It's really well built. They do a lot to make sure that the shipping cost also stays down. And you can check out Bells of Steel by clicking the link in the description below. bellsofsteel.com for Canada, bellsofsteel.us if you're in the States. Moving on to the next lifter. Who do we got here, Dill?
We have Yu Ying. And Yu Ying is deadlifting. So
Very nice.
She says new to powerlifting, but she's been bodybuilding for quite some time and has competed in IFBB Australia bikini. She weighs between 52 and 54 kilos. She struggles with knee lockout during deadlifts, especially with heavy weights, and also has difficulty finding the best foot position.
Okay. So, first, I want us to work on, I want us to narrow our stance a little bit here. I think the stance is a little excessively wide. You know, if we were to look at you from the front, we'd see this kind of angle in the shins. Generally speaking, we want to see a little more stacked angle where the feet are right under the knees. The other thing we're seeing a lot of, and this happens even before you try to pull yourself into position, we're seeing really excessive external rotation at the hip, meaning we're pushing the knees out way harder than we need to. When we push the knees out that hard, sort of beyond the position that they're going to produce best force in, you can see we see this caving in the knees as you initiate the pull, right? Here, we're really way out wide. We start the pull, whoop, knee moves in, probably a good couple centimeters there. So let those knees track a little more inwards. Let those knees track in kind of the same direction as the toes, as opposed to really overly forcing the knees out. It's an old cue to, really push your knees out, really drive your hips into the bar. And I think in a lot of cases that gets overdone and ends up causing lifters kind of this exact problem. So we're not able to maintain any like hip or lower back position off the floor. Like we're in a pretty decent position here, right? But as soon as we pull, boom, we lose all that position, knees cave in. So if the knees were more in to start with, and if we were able to sit down a little more, letting the knees forwards a little more, I think we'd probably still see some flexion in the back, but we'd be in a more upright torso position so that it would be a little bit easier to lock out. As it is here, we're kind of doing a bit of a sumo stiff leg, right? I think that pulling from this angle, everything just kind of turns into, it's all coming from here, right? The knee flexion extension is really not a huge part of the lift here, where I think we could use a lot more knee flexion extension. What I mean by that is keeping the hips, about this low, pushing them forwards, but also allowing the knees to come forwards as opposed to pushing them out quite so hard. So we end up with a bit more upright torso angle, a little bit less back flexion off the floor, because if we're pulling from this torso angle versus this torso angle, it's a lot more compressive versus shear force, whereas here, there's a lot more shear force versus compressive force. That is going to clean up the lockout. I would maybe mess around with some looser belt or beltless reps to really get more of a feel for back position and try to understand, okay, how much flexion and extension is too much? How much of my back position can I give up and still be able to recover well at lockout? So there's some experimentation to do there, and sometimes the belt and the extra feedback that comes from wearing a tight belt can, muddy the waters and make it so that it's a little harder to tell where your torso is and how you're braced. So yeah, I think using those cues, you can probably clean up your sumo deadlift and get a lot neater lockout. So I hope that helps. And that is going to be it for today's episode of Form Check Friday. If you want to submit, link in the description below. Like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.